Hello, Garland Nixon here, and the Ukraine offensive seems to be pretty much a kamikaze move. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and let's talk about the Ukraine offensive. We're about a weekend, and let's start with a little bit of history. Of course, we know that for some period of time now, there's been a discussion about offensives. Of course, we started sorry about that, really, we started last fall. And the discussion last fall was about a Russian offensive. And it was that the Ukrainians, sorry about that. Let me cut this stupid thing off. And it started last week, and it was basically, excuse me, last fall. Sorry, I really got to learn to turn my phone off. I will do that now so that it can't keep bugging us. Okay, now we can get something done. Sorry, my bad. So the Ukrainians did what Ukrainians did what they considered an offensive last September, August, September, and they came to the front line. Well, at that point, the Russians didn't have high numbers. The Ukrainians hadn't put up really that heavy a fight, and so they came towards the front line. There were some areas that were very lightly manned by the Russians. For the most part, the Russians abandoned the lightly manned areas, and the Ukrainians moved into them. And of course, the most famous one was the Kherson region, Liman, and the Ukrainians had a big public relations offensive at that time and said, hey, would you look at that? We've taken, X amount of meters and X amount of kilometers and X amount of towns and blah, blah, blah. We are on our way. And of course, the Russians then quickly responded by doing an expansion of troops. They did a call up, they did a mobilization, whatever you want to call it. They brought in a number of troops. And the discussion for some period of time was how long, how soon, when are the Russians going to do their offensive? Because that was the belief. The Ukrainians did offensive, the Russians did an offensive. The belief was that the Russians and the Ukrainians were playing the same game. I'm going to come in with my offensive. Okay, that succeeded or failed. Well, I'll fix you. I'll come back with an offensive that'll succeed or fail. And that is, it kind of reminds me of a saying, something that someone said before the Iraq War. They said, when the Americans look at the Middle East, they see America. We don't think that way, right? So the Americans had a plan. We'll go in, we'll blop out the Iraqi army, and all will be well. Well, they did, but then of course there was a guerrilla war, basically, and the U.S. had a fit for a long time in Iraq. Okay, so we look at here, and this is the same kind of belief that we've got a game. The game is you launch big arrow offensives. And then this one, we did this, so theirs is coming next. Oh, they're building up their troops. And the assumption was that's how the game was played. Now, over the course of the winter, the discussion was constantly, how long will it take for the Russians to get their offensive built up? And then once they get it built up, how soon before they're going to use it? And the Russians, let's face it, to their credit, Ray McGovern has said on many occasions, Garland, you want to know what the Russians are going to do? Listen to them. And the Russians basically said, we ain't in no rush for an offensive. We're going to grind the troops down. They pretty much said that. We're going to grind them down. You guys are fighting this big offensive. Why? Because if you're doing public relations, see, here's the thing about it. If you're fighting a public relations war, you need things that will hit big in the news cycle. If it's about PR, you need things that you can make a big splash in the news about. Oh, we took a town, or we had a big offensive and things happened. I remember when I first started on over at Fox, right? It was at Fox Business Channel in New York. And I still remember the directors of the show talking about, what's the term? We want it to go viral. I remember there was a woman named Pam Geller, right? And Pam Geller, interesting character, and I didn't get along. And I told him, boy, that Pam Geller and I do not get along, right? The next week when I came in, they sat me right next to Pam Geller. And it was like, okay, we're going to do a segment and we're going to just back away and let Garland talk to Pam. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, as soon as they saw we didn't get along very well, and I don't not get along with, ain't a whole lot of people in my life that I don't get along with. But she was just kind of totally, I mean, just irrational when I was around her. So I'm not good with it. I don't do irrational well. At any rate, so here's my point on all of that. And that was what the news wanted, what they wanted at Fox Business at that time was things that were going to go viral. That's what PR is about. Now, in the times of internet, in the times of Twitter and all that stuff, you want viral. So the PR machine, that the US is a PR machine, they want things that are going to go viral. So they want to take a town or something that they can just spread and it's going to get a lot of hits and likes and all that stuff. That's what that war is about with the US empire. Unfortunately for them, the Russians are fighting a different war. They got time on their hands, and the Russian military does not mind getting down in the trenches, getting down and dirty and fighting old fashioned. Come on, let's go to knuckle junction, right? So the Russians said all along, we that ain't our game plan. We're, as you know, you've probably heard all the discussions about von Clausewitz destroying armies, not destroying cities. So they basically told the U.S. empire what they're going to do. We're going to set up this nice little area right here in Bakhmut. You're going to feed soldiers in it, and we're going to blow them up, and equipment too. And they're like, hey, we'll fix them. We'll keep sending soldiers and equipment into Bakhmut. And that, how could that possibly go wrong, right? So they played right into the Russians' hand. And if you've been paying attention to the Russians for the last several centuries, you'd probably kind of understand that their tactics haven't changed a lot, right? They want to go to knuckle junction. They want to get down and dirty and throw artillery at you and throw rounds at you, and they're coming at you. So at any rate, over the course of the winter, that was the discussion. And then at some point, they kind of started to realize, and perhaps the Russians were telling the truth when they said they really didn't need to do a big arrow offensive. They were grinding us down, and it worked really well for the Russians, to be quite honest. And all this is related to the offensive. So it takes me a while to get there, but I like to give people background because it makes sense. And at some point, they started to realize that, but they were still in the background of discussion of, sure, we know the Russians are going to do some big offensive because we're going to do offensive. So, of course, they are. The discussion began midwinter about, okay, there's going to be a Ukrainian offensive, and it was about the weather. When's it going to be muddy? It's going to stop raining, whatever. I have heard that the original, that it was planned for March 30th or April 30th, whatever the hell, whatever day it was planned for, they decided not to do that because that was Hitler's birthday. And plus, they were getting a lot of stuff blown up. I would imagine Hitler's birthday is probably why it was chosen in the first place, if I know anything about the Ukrainian army. And I'm sure you do too. But at any rate, the Azov battalion was hoping they could slip that by, and then they could celebrate in Nazi land. But at any rate, that didn't go down. They got a lot of equipment destroyed. And really, let's be honest about this thing. Let us be 100% honest about this thing. The Ukrainian offensive was thwarted. What they had planned was the gigantic offensive. They were going to be loaded to the teeth. They were going to have 50,000, 60,000, whatever soldiers who were going to be armed to the teeth. They were coming downhill at the Russians. They were going to be able to put a lot of fire on the Russians. Well, the problem, they had a couple problems, not the least of which being that their equipment was being blown to hell. And number two, every day that you gave the Russians was another day to prepare. I don't know how many videos where I said, man, if you tell me I'm coming to get you on Thursday, I'm going to be ready. If I know there's no way around it, you're coming to get me on Thursday. I mean, you could look at what was the one, there was a kid with, there was a famous movie where there was a kid just before Christmas, his parents were going away and he stayed home, and there was a couple of burglars coming in to get him. One of them was Joe Pesci. Well, even this kid could set up traps for the burglars because he had enough time. Okay, anybody, if you tell me you're coming, anybody has enough time, they can set things up. And what the Russians do is, of course, it's old school. The Russians are very old school, conservative. They set up old school. We're going to funnel you into a trap, and then we're going to put lots of, we're going to funnel you right into the smallest area we possibly can with our defensive lines. And at some point, when you're sitting in that small area, we're going to light you up. I mean, it's old school, right? So that's what the Russians have set up, and the Ukrainians kept giving them more time and foolishly announcing it louder and louder. All right, any day now, we're coming. Oh crap! Well, we had a few problems. All right, Russians, next week. It'll be next week. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? We're busy next week. Next week doesn't work. How about we go not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after? The Russians were like, it's all right with us. How's 4:30 sound? The Russians were like, 4:30 will work for us. If it'll work for you, it'll work for us. 4:30 it is. See you a week from Tuesday on 4:30. And they went on, like literally went on the air. Any day now, Russians. We're ready to start it. We got what we need. And then there was an argument. We don't have what we need. We do have what we need. No, we don't. Yes, we do. You know, that's going back and forth. And it's like, but doesn't matter if we got it or not. Then Zelensky finally comes on and tells the truth. Well, let's not forget. There was a Washington Post story. I covered it. I'm sure you saw it. Where the discussion was, will this be success or a massacre? If you got to ask that question, you already know the answer. If you got to ask, well, we're going to go fight these guys over here. Now, let's hope it's not a massacre. You wouldn't ask that if you didn't know it was going to be a massacre. So they already knew it was going to be a massacre. There were a lot of people who knew it were going to be a massacre. Let me name one of them. Me. Let me name another of them. You. Right? So if the average putzes on the street like us, a bunch of schmucks sitting around on a given day watching a YouTube video who have absolutely no training in military tactics and strategies could see that this was going to be a massacre, then trust me, they wouldn't have wrote that in the Washington Post or the New York Times or whatever the hell it was if they didn't know. But this is a proxy war. And because it's a proxy war, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, that's their job. Their job is to be massacred. And trust me, their business is getting massacred, and business is good this week. And the numbers are unthinkable. So at any rate, so we finally get down to the last days. Zelensky says, basically, we're going with it, whatever we have. We hear from the insiders and we hear from that. The word is that there are people in Ukraine, military people, saying this ain't a good idea. It's going to be a massacre, and that Biden and Nuland and his team are like, yeah. Basically, they're like this. Yeah, like we really give a shit. So, but we're going to be massacred. Who's going to be massacred? We are. You're going to be massacred, yeah. And what part of that should bother us? You know, that is the issue of a proxy war. If you're the proxy army, right? Hey, we're going to get massacred. We kind of saw that. That's kind of the plan, really, to get you massacred. So what are you talking about? Go out there and get massacred. So if you've been watching any of the video, finally, down come the Ukrainians, right into minefields, artillery traps. I mean, come on. You've been telling people for months that you're coming. They got artillery set. You know, the Russians love artillery. That's the thing. That's what they do, right? So they come down and they're right into minefields. We're seeing videos of just running right over a mine, boom, blowing the smithereens. No time. They couldn't clear the minefields. There are minefield clearing devices, you know, vehicles, things of that nature. But of course, if they sent the mine clearing vehicles, they'd be blown to smithereens because they weren't just minefields. They were traps. They weren't. The minefield was part of a layered defense. The minefield was you'll get blown to smithereens in a minefield. Now, should you be you'll be lucky if you run over a mine and you're incinerated immediately. But if that doesn't happen, next you go into the tank traps. Of course, we got machine gun nests, mortar fires coming down on you. Then they'll even start me on the artillery fields and thermobaric weapons. So you are walking into a literal meat grinder. You're going to be torn to shreds. The minefields are like, that's step one. So I'm watching these videos all over Telegram, and geez, they're all together, clumped in one clump. There's like, now keep in mind something. They have been trained by the West, but I mean, what's a couple weeks training? I've often talked about that on this channel. I used to be a hovercraft pilot, and if you said to me, Garland, here's what we got. We got 10 hovercrafts that are heavily armed. I'd be like, okay. And they got everything, you name it. They're armed to the teeth. I'd be like, okay. We need you to train hovercraft pilots. The hovercrafts are fully amphibious. They can come up on a beach. We need you to train hovercrafts for an amphibious assault. I said, all right. Tell me how you want to do the assault. And I can train the pilots. I can train them to do that. I could do that. I was a hovercraft pilot and engineer. I could fix them, take them apart, all that stuff, replace the propellers, you name it. Mine had a diesel engine. I couldn't fix the engine, but I could do a lot of stuff on this thing. So at any rate, I'd say, sure. And they'd say, okay. I'd say, all right. Give me a year. They'd be like, no, 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 you don't have that time. Tell you what, we'll give you 2 months. I'd say I can train these guys to die in 2 months. They might as well just put a gun in their mouths and pull the trigger. They don't even need the enemy. They're going to go crash these damn things in each other and kill each other because it ain't easy to fly a hovercraft. Trust me. And the weather's got to be right. And if you're under fire and you don't know what you're doing and you're flying this thing, it ain't going to be a good day for you, but it's going to be a short one, right? So that was me. And I'm training. Hovercraft's hard. Think of like a tank or something, whatever. These things are hard. These are vehicles. These are things that are hard to learn. That's why I use that as an analogy. I forget it. You need a year, right? They give them weeks, maybe months. And they throw them out on the battlefield and they all go together. And you probably might have saw the video. They all come together in a clump. There's like literally 7 or 8 tanks in a clump. And man, there's artillery fire and there's God only knows what raining down on them. There's they had those Bradley fighting vehicles, all that kind of crap. And they're all in one clump. And they are just, you remember the term we started off with? Massacre. Massacre, right? And that's what you get. If they were trained properly, number one, they wouldn't all be in a clump. That ain't never a good idea. However, they probably had difficulties. You know what I mean? They had a road. They didn't, they couldn't run the things real well. There's artillery all over the place. One gets blown up, the other one's near it. And so the bottom line is they didn't have a chance from the second they got in those things and the so-called training that they had. All right, now let's look at something. So bottom line is this. The Russians laid in wait, set up for months, set up traps, and the Ukrainians, when it was time, it appears to me that maybe there was a pushback by the Ukrainian military. The neocon said, it's time to die. Go forward. And the Ukrainians are getting torn to shreds, which is what you do if you allow the Russian army to set up layered defense for kilometer after kilometer for month after month. You're going to die. There ain't you don't come out of that one alive. Now, let's look at the political end because that's what happened. That's what that is what they're concerned with. Let's look at this. White House anxiously watches Ukraine's counteroffensive, seeing the war and Biden's reputation at stake, right? So here's the bottom line. Let's talk about this for 1 second. This implies that they don't know how this thing turns out, doesn't it? Anxious, like you don't need it. What anxiety? You know what I mean? It's like this. Somebody hands you an egg and say, "Can you make me an omelet?" Right? And you're like, "I have a lot of anxiety. What as to how things are going to turn out for this egg?" I know how things are going to turn out for the egg. It's going to get cracked and fried. There's no reason to be anxious. We know how this works. This egg is about to be a part of an omelet. Well, there's no need for anxiety here. There's no need unless you are either so stupid or misled. And keep in mind something. Joe Biden's a neocon. The neocons are ideologues. Politics are the equivalent of a religion to them. They believe things as a matter of faith. So they believed that the Ukrainians were going to push through when there's, I guarantee you this, they're Pentagon people, they're people from their military strategists likely told them. I mean, they bullcrap, but they likely told them, well, it's a tall order. I mean, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but, we can move forward with it. I'm just saying, hey, guys, you might want to double think about this. Move forward. Well, I mean, if you think about it, what the Russians are fighting with shovels. They're unarmed. They're out of missiles. They've been out of missiles since 2 months into the war. And what few missiles they have are actually powered by washing machine chips. So the Russians ain't got much of a chance here. They're out of everything, right? They're fighting each other. They're blowing up their own pipelines, blowing up their own, attacking the Kremlin. I mean, the Russians are so busy plotting against themselves that they don't have time to fight they have no time to fight the Ukrainians. So most likely this thing's going to work as far as Biden and his team of lunatics are concerned. They believe they get high on their own supply, as they say. They believe their own bull crap. All right, let's keep going. Senior officials are convinced that future support for the Ukraine war and President Joe Biden's global reputation hinges on the success of the counteroffensive. Well, first of all, Joe Biden's global reputation. Have you seen this poor idiot stumbling around? He was at the airport academy the other day. He fell. There was nothing there. He turned around and pointed at the ground, right? He fell. Wham! He turned around and pointed at the ground like, hey, There's ground there, and I fell, and something. Buddy, take a look at that ground. Take a look at that flat area where I fell. It could be something there. Maybe he tripped over a bacteria or something like that. I don't know. But whatever the case may be, maybe somebody left an old COVID mask and he stepped on it and slipped or something. Maybe, I don't know. But whatever, he went down and he turns around and points at the ground like it's the ground's fault, right? At any rate, let's continue. His global reputation. Succeed, and Western military and economic aid will flow. Succeed. Well, they could always redefine success. Success is if one Ukrainian soldier walks out alive, we've succeeded. There's an idea. If at some point during the battle we take 10 meters of ground, that's a thought. So they need to redefine success. Stumble or fail to meet expectations, that support will likely dry up, sparking heightened calls for an expedited diplomatic resolution and hampering one of the White House's signature international achievements. That's an achievement. According to them, the Ukraine war is a signature international achievement, starting a war with a nuclear power, destroying the economy of the Europe, making Russia considerably stronger, exposing that the Russians can take out your Patriot system with one Kinzhal missile, and there's nothing you can do to prevent them. That is, I guess, if you're Joe Biden, I mean, as bad as things have gone for you, you got to call something good. Kiev has said its share of make or break moments, but the current round of fighting has taken on heightened importance, right? U.S. officials do not know if lawmakers will greenlight more funding for Ukraine when the current tranche runs out. They will. And let me just say this. That's Washington, D.C. There's never problems getting money through for war because the system is owned by the military-industrial complex. So they're going to do that. Anxiety is also growing as Ukrainian elements are striking deep into sovereign Russian territory. Look, they're pinprick distractions. They're doing this stuff. Does it piss people off? Yes, it does. Does it aggravate the Russians? Yeah. Does people get injured here and there? Absolutely. But it has no bearing on the outcome of the war. They have no military significance whatsoever. They are doing things to distract the Russians because they're getting their asses kicked. And they got to do something to call something a victory. And the U.S. to say, well, we're really stressed out by the fact that they're striking deep inside Russia. After Blinken and these people went on, well, we don't care if they strike inside Russia. Sunak and, they might as well strike inside Russia. Yeah, sure, they can use them whatever they want, strike inside Russia. But we're anxious. Why? Because they're striking inside Russia. U.S. officials believe that Kiev, or at least pro-Ukraine forces, are responsible for a drone attack on the Kremlin, blah, blah, blah. The U.S. had intelligence indicating that Ukrainian President Zelensky's government planned to attack the Nord Stream pipeline, and later believe a pro-Kiev group did it. Well, they're right, a pro-Kiev group in that you could call Joe Biden and Newland and those clowns a Kiev group. So yes, they get the same lies and what have you, right? And here's the thing. Politico spoke to 5 U.S. officials. Well, we can trust them. That's the news we have now. What do you have? We talked to some people from the CIA, and they gave us the truth, right? About the mounting concerns that could sully Biden's hope for triumphant run to the world stage, all spoke on the condition of anonymity, right? So we got anonymous U.S. officials, and we're supposed to, and see, that's the news that we get in America. Politico, anonymous U.S. officials. That's the excuse that we get for news. We will continue. And they're talking about what happens with NATO's summit in July. So Biden has said they'll have the funding. They probably will. Look, I'm an American citizen. They don't give a shit about us. They do not care if we all starve as long as the money goes to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Will they give them the money? Of course. If they need it, but if it's needed for America for whatever, they'll just take it from that. So they go on about some other stuff, and they talk about China a little bit. While elections aren't usually about foreign policy, this one in 2024 will be about who will be capable of governing. Well, from the looks of things, it'll be about who can use the security state to take out their opponents, because that seems to be the plan for the Biden administration. But at any rate, so they get into some other crap, but we're not talking about Saudi Arabian stuff right now. Okay, so all of that gets us to where we are. right? The Ukraine offensive happens. Now, a couple of things have happened during the week that I think are suspiciously timed. I'm big on timing, right? Let's go with one of them. They blew the damn. Blew the damn. I cannot the dam. Let's just call it the dam that I can pronounce. Like they always have V's and K's together in like Russian and Ukrainian language. So I'm not with the avka stuff, right? V's and K's don't work well together for people like me who are struggling with English. So I know I ain't doing much with Ukrainian or Russian. So it's something that sounds like havka, and that just like makes my spittle run out of my mouth when I try to say V, P, and K's and things like that together. So you get the picture. Some damn blew, and Ukrainians blew it, and of course said the Russians did it, right? Now I'm not surprised that they didn't. I'm only surprised that they didn't say the Russians didn't blow it. They actually dug it out, because let's face it, they don't even have explosives left. All the Russians have is shovels. So, I mean, you can use shovels to dig the dam out until the water flows. So let's just say the Russians, since they're out of missiles, they're out of weapons, they're out of explosives, they're fighting themselves. And what few missiles they have left, they have to save to attack themselves. So, they might have another Kremlin attack they want to do. They might want to go after their own pipeline some more. So what little explosives and shells they have, they got to save for themselves. So no doubt they took their shovels and they dug this dam right out of the to pieces, and out the water flow. Now, my opinion is that serves a little bit of let's just say this, it serves a small, you can argue it serves some military service, a use for the Ukrainians. But I think a big part of that was to let that happen while they're losing, while they're getting, it's like we need cover. We need smoke cover while we get the hell knocked out of us with this offensive. So instead of talking about what's happening in the offensive, everybody will talk about the dam. Then this weekend, I think it's no coincidence, for the millionth time in a row, for the 11th time in a row, more charges for Trump, right? There is no doubt in my mind that this week was specifically chosen for that. They specifically chose this week to charge Trump. Why? Because of the Ukraine offensive. If the Ukraine offensive was successful, which there's no way it could be, but let's just say for the sake of argument that it was, and the militants were rushing towards Crimea as we speak, right? They wouldn't have charged Trump. They wouldn't have blown any dams. They wouldn't have done anything. They would not want any public relations distraction. These people are about public relations. But because they knew before they started it wasn't going to work, and after they started it, things weren't going to work, they needed distractions. They needed something for the news cycle. A dam is blown. Let's talk about how the Russians should be charged with criminal stuff for blowing the dam. Let's not talk about the fact that the Ukrainians are getting massacred in the minefields of the Russian defense lines. Let's also talk about Trump. There you go. We're charging Trump. And now people are going to be like, oh, my God, yay, Trump is charged. Oh, boo, Trump is charged. We got to fight back, right? But what they ain't going to say is, hey, what's going on in the minefields of eastern Ukraine? No, I believe that was done deliberately to give the mainstream media something to chat about, something to talk about. Now, things have gone south. And what we've seen is this. This offensive shows two things. If you remember, a couple weeks ago, Zelensky et al., right? Him and his team, him and his circle, were starting to say, perhaps this spring offensive will turn into a summer offensive, maybe fall, maybe next winter, or maybe a spring offensive. It would be better if we do a spring offensive next spring when, we've had time to season things and get ourselves together, maybe a little more training. They were trying to get the hell out from under this. And the neocons were like, ain't happening. You're going now. Right. So this thing has happened. So they cocked their guns. We're coming in the next couple of weeks. And the Russians were like, thank you, idiots, for telling us. We will now commence to attack all of your ammo dumps and your anti-aircraft and the places where you muster your troops and the places where you store your material and your explosives and shells and things like that. Right. So the Russians are like, okay. So they say, we're going to attack, and the Russians will go, thank you, idiots, for telling us. And they blow the living hell out of everything they got. There's mushroom clouds going up over Western Ukraine, where they're blowing up the Russians are blowing up their shells and their arms depot, right? So the Russians then established this. if you're going to launch an attack, just prior to the attack, we're going to launch an attack, an air assault, and we're going to make it very, very difficult for you to do the attack. That's our game plan. So the Russians go through with their game plan, and they make it very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to attack. And what I think we've learned from that is this: how did the Ukrainians don't have the capacity no longer, if they ever did, they no longer possess the capacity to do a big arrow offensive, because they have to set up for it. They got to bring all this equipment in, and they got to store all this equipment, and then they've got to disperse that. Think about it. You got shells, you got all these things, right? You got to bring them in. You got to store them in warehouses or wherever. Then you got to take them out of the warehouses and muster them all to the front. You got to bring troops together. They've got to muster all to the front, right? So there's really an administrative side of this. And the Russians have enough intelligence now. Recently, they launched another spy satellite that is specifically designed to look at Ukraine, that has a significant all-weather ability to monitor Ukraine at a very high level. And intricate level might be the word. And I think one of the things that we've learned is, because of the Russians' combination of intelligence, of space assets, and their capabilities for long distance standoff strikes, the Ukrainians can't do an offensive, because the stuff that they bring in is going to get blown up. The preparations for the offensive, it's Jeet Kune Do, the interception of a fist, right? You intercept the fist before it comes, and you get to a point where you can intercept it before the person even throws it. You can see when that punch is going from the brain to the hand, and you intercept it then with a preemptive strike. So that's where they are. They intercepted their Jeet Kune Do in the old Ukrainians, and they've gotten to the point now where the Ukrainians don't even get a chance to throw a punch. They see the punch coming, and they screw them over before they can throw a punch. So the Ukrainians now, we are in a war where the Russians have the capacity to launch big arrow offensives if they choose, but the Ukrainians don't. Now, what people are saying is it's time for the Russians, and now the Russians are going to come and they're going to do a big arrow offensive. I will say what I've said all along: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Russians have been very successful in this war, in fighting static battles, in pinning the Ukrainians down and putting a lot of fire on them, in doing a lot, getting their defensive areas set up and saying, okay, we've taken it. Because look, what's a war about? You take an area, and then you guard that area. Now, if the Russians couple that to some extent, they have to do that, because part of that is actually, Eastern Ukraine now they consider Russian land proper, so they've got to defend their own land. So they don't really have to press an offensive. That their plan of moving slow and grinding up the Ukrainians seems to be, to me, to be much more effective. They aren't there. Don't get me wrong. Are the Russians losing people? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And that's war. And it's unfortunate, but that people are dying, period. But the Russians are losing people. The Ukrainians are losing people. But what we see right now with the Ukraine is a massacre. And how's that going to change in the future? Somehow the Ukrainians are going to say, okay, that didn't work. Now what are we going to do? This is their hopes and dreams going up in smoke. Because the Ukrainians, remember what they said: we can't stop this war. Our game plan is to take back all of Eastern Ukraine and to take back the Crimea. That's what we're going to do. We ain't going to stop till we do that. Now you're making your move to do that, and you're getting massacred. You're making your move to do that, and you're getting massacred. And you were punch drunk before you even started, because they hit all your preparations. So what are you going to do? Well, the fall's coming. We better do another offensive. Let's start going around begging for more stuff to bring it in to stop the Ukrainians. To launch our next offensive against the Russians. Here's the problem you have: the Russians are still building defense lines. So the longer you wait, the more impossible this task gets. And if you think it's bad now, trust me when I tell you this, it ain't going to be no easier in the fall. It's not like the Russians are going to go into their defense lines and start removing stuff. Hey guys, what do we do? We got a lot of tank traps. Take them out. We don't need those anymore. They're done. Just throw them away. Set them on the side somewhere. No, they're going to maintain the defense lines that they have, and they're just going to reinforce them. They'll reinforce them with people, with soldiers, with fighters. They'll reinforce them with guns, everything they got. They're building stuff coming off the assembly line, tanks, you name it. So they're going to continue to get stiffer and stiffer. If you can't do anything with them now, trust me, in 6 months from now, they're impenetrable now. They're not going to get more penetrable. They're going to get more impenetrable. So that part of it is over. The idea that the Ukrainians can, after this, let's be honest about this. The whole discussion of the Ukrainians taking anything back, anything period back after this goes on, that conversation's over. Which means what? Which means what? What do they do? What are the options of the neocons right now? Can they send in the troops? They don't have enough troops to send in. Can they attack the Russians? Well, they've already found out what's going to happen with their air defense. They ain't going to have none. They already found out if they attack the Russians, they're protecting their bases. They're protecting all of this stuff with Patriot systems. We already know how that'll work. If they want to tangle with the Russians, they'll have no air defense after day one. The Patriot missiles will all be dead. So so for them to even decide we're going to take action against the Russians ourselves, they don't have the soldiers to do it. They don't have the numbers to do it. Their equipment's all blown up. They're running out of the missiles and the shells that they need. Might I add, the wherewithal within the population to continue to endure this is not getting any stronger. It's not getting any more. The spines of the population of Europe and the US are not getting stiffer for this. They're hurting, and they don't like hurting. So now they're in a position where, now, don't get me wrong, they're going to have the NATO meeting in July. My suspicion is the NATO meeting will be what a NATO meeting is. You know, you'll have Annalena Baerbock speaking. You'll have von der Leyen, Biden, whatever, right? You'll have maybe Blinken. You'll have the people who are the true believers. And they'll go to NATO and they'll say, we're winning, the Russians are losing, we must stay the course, we must continue to fight, the Russians can never win, the Russians can't win, the Russians won't win, the Russians aren't winning, they're down to fighting with shovels, oh, this is great, things are looking good for our troops, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's another issue, and that has to be thought about, because people are thinking of the response and the thoughts and actions of the patrons of the proxy army, right? So the patrons of the proxy army, let's be honest, what do they care? It ain't their guys dying. They don't have to come home. They don't have to talk to their people. So what do they really care? You know, that the Ukrainians are dying. They're good with that. They can go on until there's no Ukrainians left. I do believe that after this offensive, and this is the thing to think about, there will come a time when there will be enough political pushback in Ukraine that it's going to be difficult to maintain it. There's going to come a time when the women and children and fathers at home are going to just, in Ukraine, start pushing, saying, look, man, what's going on here? We just had another massacre after massacre after massacre. And now what are you going to do? You're going to come ask for our other sons. You're going to come ask for their fathers. You're going to ask for their other children to go back for the next massacre. That's all it is. They're going to go back to the Ukrainian towns and say, good news for you guys. You get some more people to get to die, and glory to Stepan Bandera on behalf of Joe Biden. Some point that's going to wear out, and you're going to have difficulty there. You're going to get pushback from there. That's coming. That could be the thing that collapses this thing. It's going to collapse. In my opinion, it's going to collapse. The Ukraine project now, I am convinced that will collapse. Do I think that the Biden people and the Newland people, that they'll ever give up? Absolutely not. They won't. They'll never give up. That ain't who they are. That ain't what they do. But the Ukraine project will collapse. The part of it will be, of course, at home in America. The pushback is getting louder and louder. The other part of it is, at some point, it's going to come from Ukraine. They're going to ask questions. At some point, some of the European people are going to be saying, look, this has been going on for a long time. We're in our second year. We're hurting, and they ain't getting nowhere, man. How do you go in July if they get flat? I mean, just flattened, which appears to be what's going to happen. When this thing goes on, are they going to continue next week? Hey, what happened the first week? Massacre. Okay, good. Well, Monday's coming. Let's get another week started and get back out there. Let's keep this massacre going. How long Do they continue with the massacre? How long do they continue pushing Ukrainians into this thing and getting them massacred? And at some point, it's over. Okay. At some point, they say, that's it. This thing's done. The offensive is done. Okay. Let's look at this thing and evaluate how it went. How things go, guys. Will there be a universe in which they can say, I think we did okay. I think we did pretty good. Not bad. Let's start gearing up for the next one. Because if you're a Ukrainian soldier and you survive that one, you know you ain't surviving the next one. You probably ain't surviving this one, but you know you ain't surviving the next one. So at that point, it's just suicide. You know your day is coming. And if you're Ukrainian, you know if you got a son, you know if he's 12, that they'll keep fighting until he's old enough to turn 16 and they can throw him out there. They're going to look, how old is your son? 12. Son, yeah, you got about 4 more years to live. Because we want to keep this thing going. As soon as you turn 16, we're going to throw you out there and some artillery is going to rip you to pieces. Why? Well, just because that's what Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland told us to do. You better spend time with your son now, enjoy him, do fun things, take him fishing, go to the beach, whatever, because in 4 years, artillery is going to rip both his arms off. And of course, he'll lay on the flop on the ground and bleed to death. But of course, maybe he'll be in a tank or something and that'll get blown up and he'll be crushed to death instantly. So there's a lot of options for him. None of them good. Enjoy your son now, young Ukrainian person, because he's surely going to die. That's where the Ukrainians are. I don't think that can last but so long. I don't think you can keep telling the people of Ukraine, let's keep fighting the Russians, and they're running out of people. So this thing, remember the word I've been using for month after month after month. The month is collapse. Collapse. The word is collapse. That is the direction this thing goes. That is the finale of this thing, collapse. And keep an eye on what happens in NATO going into July, but it's going to end up being like we did. Everything was great, but you know what it is. In July, when they meet in Vilnius, all is well, all looks good. We won. Yes, that's right. Yeah, well, sure. Was there a massacre? Did we lose soldiers? Yeah, but well, the Ukrainians won't care anyway. We're going to call it a victory. That's the definition of a victory. Whatever we say is winning. So there we go. I think we're looking at a situation where they're going to try to do a public relations mop up and they'll try to talk about other things. And that's it. And however, the realist in the world is going to start asking questions. They're going to now have to deal with realists in the world. They're going to have to deal with some realists here. Look, you know, hey, there's some people running here. There's Trump, there's Cornel West, there's JFK. Although the media tries to ignore them and keep what they're saying out of the mainstream conversation, I suspect all of them are going to start saying, look, you did your big offensive. You told if it was coming and it was a massacre, which means, let's face it, if their plan is to run the Russians out, make sure the Russians are all gone, and take back their soil from the Russians, including Crimea, you make your offensive is a massacre. Let's be honest. At that point, where do you go? See, that's the question. Where do you go from here? NATO attack is not an option. It really isn't, because they don't have what they need to do it. And what little they had, they've given up. And they don't have the political or military wherewithal in the EU to do it. So the voices are going to get louder and louder. In fact, there will be screaming. There will be a cacophony. They'll be coming from so many different directions in so many different languages that you won't be able to tell what they're saying, but it'll all be the same thing in this thing. And the neocons can't. They can't. They can't, because the project is, we got to weaken Russia and Russia will be stronger, which means it's over. That means when this thing collapses, that's the end of the neocon project. The neocon project is Russia cannot grow. Russia must be stopped. Russia must be weakened. Russia must be destroyed. And then we'll take Russia and go after China. You went after Russia and you lost, and you're losing. At that point, you can't go after China or anybody else, because the neocon project has already lost. So basically what we're looking at right now is maybe the last few weeks or months of the entire neocon project that's been going along. How do you continue this thing if you can't win? If it's a small country, if it's Iraq or whoever, whatever, Afghanistan, you just leave. It doesn't matter anyway. But the whole world is screaming right now. The whole world is pressing you, and it's going to get louder. How do you how does the U.S. resist the international pressure? It's going to be tough. Let's look at and see if we have any. I'm going to look and see if I have any. Do we have any super chats? If so, I'll answer the questions. All right. Iceman Vamp says we're going to get massacred. Yeah, that was plan A. That's all. No, actually, it wasn't we. It's you're going to get massacred on our behalf. They're using Trump as a smokescreen, says Eric. You're 100% right. That's what this is about. This whole charging Trump now is to try to take over the news cycle. Salty Texas Trucker says, I said months ago the offense would be a giant suicide mission. That's all it is. It's a kamikaze mission. The whole war is a kamikaze mission on behalf of the neocons. We're going to go to Rockfin. We got a couple people. Jim Garrison says, Garland nails it again. Carolyn Zaremba says, Garland Nixon. Okay, now Wanda Lafata Kreitzer says, what I will never understand is why U.S. citizens don't care what we do around the world. Can they not get that they will bring this home and treat us the same? It has already started, in fact. Yeah, I agree with you. I talk about that now, that the U.S. Citizens are just being, had, that they're looking like a bunch of schmucks and idiots, and they're doing whatever they want, and it's laughable. I do think this offensive is going to be a problem because they made such a big deal of it. And all the other part of it is this. It becomes, you told us you were going to do this and such. You told us the Russians couldn't win. You told us the Ukrainians were going to beat the Russians. So we're going to be at a very interesting place. Oh, here's another one. Raphael, Chief of Staff, said we have 3 superpowers in the world. Why are we still fighting, bro? Yeah, we're 3 superpowers and we're fighting 2 of them. How about that? Yeah, this is an interesting time because it becomes this. What it comes down to now is, what's your plan? Biden and Newland, what's your plan? You said we were going to do this. You went for it. In a way, this was really stupid. The Biden team would have been better off going along with what the Ukrainian military people wanted and not doing it, because they could still continue to drag this thing out and what have you. But in actually doing it, they said we got to hit the Russians hard, and they can't. The Russians are weak and they're stupid and they're out of ammo and they're out of missiles and blah, 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 blah. So we can easily hit the Russians. So now you had a trope. You had a story that the Russians were weak and it was going to be easy to beat them. That was your story. You ran with it, and you had people that were willing to go along with it. Okay, you had your story. You rolled with it. That story's now done. That story has fallen apart completely. So now what do? Now here's what I would say. We've had Ukraine conflict part 1. Now we go to Ukraine conflict part 2. After the offensive, I would say it's a whole new world, a whole new conflict from the perspective of how the narrative is, because the narrative have been the Russians are weak, they're stupid, they're inferior, and they're going to lose, and they're militarily incompetent, all of these things. Okay. So now you've sent the Ukrainians right down the teeth of that monster, and they get chewed up. So the argument that the Russians are weak, they can't fight, and are incompetent, and they're out of everything now. Well, if that's the case, you lost. You went in, you sent your vaunted army with their wonder weapons in against an incompetent bunch of people with shovels and lost. That don't sound good. And got massacred and never even had a chance. In most instances, never even got an opportunity to fight. And then when this thing is over, how do you spin this in the news? And how do you say, all right, next, this is going to be easy. The next thing we're going to do is X. What we will know at that point is this. Ukrainians can never win this. After this, it'll be the Russians have taken particular. Here's what you'll know. The areas that the Russians have seized, they've adequately protected and set up a defense line that the Ukrainians can't breach. That's what we'll know. The Ukrainians can't breach it. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week, not a year from now, not 10 years from now, not ever. The Ukrainians can't breach it. So it becomes, for a person who's from the outside who wants peace, saying, you got to seek peace. Why? Because what are your options now? What are you going to do? Another PR offensive to say the Russians are fighting with shovels? That sounds great. But the whole world is looking, and they know if they are fighting with shovels, they got some mighty good shovels. because you can't reach their defense lines. They've been set up. You gave them too much time. And now not only can you not do that, you've lost half the damn equipment that you sent over there. So now what are you going to do? Back to Germany? Hey, Germany, you got any tanks left? Yeah, cough them up. What for? So they can get blown up by the Russians again. They got more minefields, and those minefields ain't just going to blow things up by themselves. They're minefields, but they can't blow something up unless we put something in the minefields. That's where you come in. Send us tanks, send us UK, send us stuff. We got to put something in the minefield so those mines will blow up. That ain't much of a plan. So that's where they are. They are now, and now next July, in July, next month, they got to sit down together and have a talk. But don't pay any attention to that, because the talk there is simply going to be, yes, we're winning, keep up the fight. It's a cheerleading squad. It is a bunch of ideologues who just make stuff up and say it. But it ain't going to be that easy. And the problem they'll have is in their coalition, the calls will be getting louder. On the ground, the calls will be getting louder. And how much longer can they hold Ukraine together before Ukraine explodes into some kind of a defiance that says we can't just keep sending our boys into a meat grinder anymore? Let's see what we got here. EU will turn against the U.S. and destroy the U.S. empire with their own nukes. It's coming. Interesting. I don't think of it, but let's see what we said. ThinkPad 2.0, keep up the great work. One of the best in the business. Thank you, everyone. Is there one more? What is this? Chief of Staff said we have to super pass the war while we're still fighting, bro. Thanks a lot. And I think that's it for everybody. And let me look. I think that's it for Rockfin. To the last Ukrainian, never underestimate Russian shovels. All right. Well, that's it, everybody. Thanks a lot. Please make sure everybody share. Make sure you share this. It's very important. If you can, a lot of people, gave a couple bucks and what they could, and that's highly appreciated. Those who can't, look, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. We got, follow me on Telegram or Twitter or whatever. Those who can, patreon.com. Even if you can do a $5, $10 a month on Patreon would be great. Also, buymeacoffee.com/Garland NH. You can do, it says like buy Garland a coffee, $5 or something if you can do that. And don't forget, it's now like Patreon. You can do a subscription on Buy Me a Coffee Week. Say I'm going to buy Garland a coffee a month for $5 or whatever you want. So certainly appreciate that. And of course, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Go over there, become a member. It costs nothing to become a member, $0. And if and when they throw me off of YouTube, you will be able to go there. Somebody has what I said before. Douglas Miller has exactly what I said last year. This is going to be the mother of all debacles. And of course, don't forget on Rockfin, if you can afford it, you can become a Rockfin subscriber. That's $14.99 a month or $12 something a month if you sign up for a year, because they give you 2 free months. So if you can afford to be a subscriber on Rockfin, I certainly appreciate it. It'll help the channel. If you can't, then that's cool. Just become a member. Subscribers every Wednesday from 9 to 10 a.m. now. We'll be back, me and Scott Ritter, doing our Wednesday subscriber only show. So if you become a subscriber, that's the one thing you do get every Wednesday, Scott Ritter and I, if you can afford to be a subscriber on Rockfin. Thanks a lot, everybody. One more super sticker from Red Chili Pepper. Thanks. I think that's it. Everyone, thanks a lot. Beautiful Saturday here in the state of Maryland on the beautiful shores of the Chesapeake Bay. It's beautiful country, beautiful area, and I love living here. So thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. I'm out.